slides because the interactive lessons might be 10 slides long. So this did make it kind of hard to grade 155 lessons. But if it was a lesson that I felt like was a really good one that really hit the standards that I was needing it to hit, I would take the time to do that. Some more free resources that I use. I mentioned Legends of Learning before because I keep this linked at the top of my classwork on Google Classroom, and the students absolutely love this. It's what I do is for every unit I will create like a couple of playlists. Now on the free version you can only do, I think it's 2 playlists at a time. It's either 2 or 3 playlists at a time. But so I will create those at the beginning of every unit, and then you can set them to be active for a certain amount of time. So I'll keep it active the entire time we're on the unit. And I don't necessarily do this as an assignment, but what I do is when they finish an assignment early, like let's say we're in the classroom doing something and somebody finishes 20 minutes before everybody else, well then that gives them 20 minutes of time on Legends of Learning. And so they know they finish something, they go on to Legends of Learning, and they start on that. Now, one thing I did use during this virtual work is they added a new resource called Awakening that allowed them to battle these monsters. Like, it's kind of like Prodigy, if you're familiar with Prodigy, where they would go around a kind of an open world, and they would come across like a monster, and then they would have to answer questions correctly to be able to use these attack cards, or they could do healing cards or whatever. And so instead, it was more of a review than it was kind of a teaching one, because some other games actually will teach the students instead of just reviewing. And so I used this as a way of just reviewing content from this whole year. I didn't do just the new content that I covered in the virtual work. I did it for content throughout the whole year. The only thing is you can't choose the questions for the games. You can choose the content area, but you can't choose the questions. So I did find that there would be some questions they would come across that they had never heard of before, and they probably weren't going to hear of until next year. And so I would just tell students, just try your best, do what you think, based on what you know, give it your best answer, and that way that they can move on with the game. Go Formative, that one, I don't use it quite as much. And that's mainly because a lot of what I do in the classroom is through Google Docs or Google Slides or Google Sheets or paper and pencil. When I do a lab, they do not use their devices for the lab unless they need them for like timing or something. But I'm a firm believer in when we're doing hands-on stuff, any kind of hands-on activity, Chromebooks are closed and up, and they get out their paper and then pencil. So Go Formative, though, I have used it more virtually than I did in the classroom, and that's just because I can take PDFs of stuff that I might have printed off in the classroom and add it onto Go Formative, and then I can create answer boxes where they can go in and type in their answers. This is useful for a resource I'm going to share in a little bit is we do Science World magazines, and they have an online resource where you can add in their articles and their skill sheets, their like worksheets that go with the articles onto Google Classroom, but you can only add them as PDFs. So I have found that this is useful to use Go Formative, so the kids can still answer them at home during this virtual time. With the free version, you're only allowed, I think, so many PDF uploads, but our district actually has paid for our district version or whatever, so we don't have a limit. But I do remember before, when I used it before the district paid for it, and I just can't remember how many PDFs you're allowed. I think it's only so many per month. Another website that I use, a resource that I use, is FET Interactive Simulations. I've actually been using those for a very long time. I didn't use one during this virtual work because there wasn't one to go with our unit. But there's a huge selection of simulations. You can find something for almost anything. The only thing is you can't, you do have to you can't put the questions with the simulation. So I found it easier to print off a copy of the documents that I want, of what I want them to answer, questions I want them to answer. Sometimes I found it easier just to make my own, create my own questions. And then they would then just write out their answers while they're doing the simulation on their Chromebook, which is another reason why it did make it a little bit harder virtually to do this, but you could do it. You could create a Google Doc or use GoFormative along with the simulation. They would just have to go back and forth. And then I added Google Classroom on here again because you can create questions on Google Classroom, and I did not use this. I did not use it in the classroom, but I have been using it virtually. I would just once a week, I would just ask them a question. Sometimes it was content related. Like after we spent a few days on eclipses, I would throw in a question on there just to see if they really got the content I was wanting them to get. We had to take attendance every week for our students, and so we were allowed to count them present as long as they interacted in some way. It could be communicating to us on Google Classroom or on Remind, or just doing their assignments. And so this is an easy way for me to take attendance, because sometimes I would have, students who would answer this question before they would get their work done. So I could count them as present, a couple days before their actual work was done. All right, so my district does pay for some things, and BrainPop is one of those, and it is probably one that I use quite a bit. I used it a lot for virtual work, and I do plan on using it if we start out next year virtually. I do plan on using it as well. It has short cartoon movies that can be assigned, and then you can with each movie they have a quiz, challenges, worksheets, vocabulary, simulations, games. Like there's so much you can choose from, and you can. I would differentiate with my students. If I had a student who I knew would be overwhelmed by doing everything, I would just assign the movie and the quiz to them. Then I had some students who I knew would go through everything without any problem. So I would assign them more things, and you can do that. You could individually assign assignments. The only thing that I don't like is that it does not work with Google Classroom. So students do have to create a separate login, and then they have a dashboard, and it's really easy to see what they need to do. You just can't connect that to Google Classroom. Another resource is Science World. We get the actual printed magazines, which when we're in the classroom, I will use the actual magazine before I will the Chromebook, because I do believe in giving them some downtime on the screen time. Just because we're one-to-one does not mean my students have their Chromebooks open and using them all the time. Now, unfortunately, virtually, I think it's a little bit harder to give them that down screen time, but I would try. Like when we did moon phases, I challenged the students to, close your Chromebook for today, and I just want you to, track what moon phase you're seeing, every night for a couple weeks. and I couldn't do a month like I wanted to because we didn't, we didn't go that long into the virtual stuff, but uh, some of them did it and some of them didn't. But the one, even if they didn't do it every day, some of them would at least they would pay attention to the moon. So just giving them something else to focus on, school related that wasn't screen time. But unfortunately, the majority of the work has to be on the screen because they're not here in the classroom with me. And so the science world, I would assign the article on Google Classroom where they would have the PDF that they could read. And then I would put the skill sheet that goes with it on Go Formative. And so they would answer the questions on Go Formative. And it worked out really well virtually. IXL is another one my district pays for, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, it's not my favorite. It is great for math, but our district paid a lot of money for us to have this for all subject areas, and I think they realized their mistake, and so I don't think we're going to have it in science next year, but it's not horrible because I did use it virtually. It was a good virtual practice for students. It's just when I'm in the classroom, I feel like I could give them better things to do, more higher level questioning and practice myself. But when they weren't with me, IXL was a good resource to use just to give them just some extra practice on different things. Vocabulary. When there is something that fits for my content, I love it. Unfortunately, there are not a whole lot of things that I felt fit with my sixth grade content. I think our eighth graders probably used it more. They probably had more luck with finding things, but they take content and put it into songs that are rapped. And so the students loved it. They loved listening to them. And then you could assign vocab with it, quizzes, reading. There's a lyrics lab where they could make up their own lyrics to a song, which that was hard to do with sixth grade. But I did challenge a few of my more creative students to try it, and they did like it. But that was not something that I would require all my students to do. And so I know that a lot of you guys may not be done with this year yet, but as you heard at the beginning of this webinar, that I am. Teachers are still working, but students have been done for a couple weeks, and I have been wrapping my head around, oh my gosh, what am I going to do if we have to start the year virtually? Ending the year, it wasn't my favorite, obviously. It was very stressful, but the students knew me. I had a relationship with those students, and so they kind of knew what to do. They knew my expectations, and it went well. Beginning of the year, oh my goodness, that's why I make those connections with not only students but with parents. I really work hard at that, and I can't imagine starting out virtually trying to build those relationships. So I just want to share with you guys just some of my thoughts on what I want to do starting out next year if we have to start virtually. Again, that's a big if. My district actually has already had us come up with 3 weeks worth of lessons for the start of next year for virtual. Doesn't mean that we are doing that, but they just wanted us to have something in place. And so I have decided that I would do weekly videos using my Chromebook camera just so the students could see me and be familiar with my face. Just telling them, hey, this is what you need to do for this week. And just, maybe sharing something personal about myself, just trying to get them to get to know me a little bit better. I will still have my weekly Google Meets so that they can talk to me one-on-one. I think that is important in building that relationship. And then I will have weekly getting to know you questions on Google Classroom because not only do I think students need to get to know you, but I like to get to know them. And, having 155 students, it takes a while to happen when I can see them, in person in my own classroom every day. It's going to be really, really hard virtually. But I can see their pictures on our grading system. And so my plan is to kind of keep a little chart of like have their picture with it, and then have things underneath it about them, things that they share with me on Google Classroom if we have to start virtually. And that way, when I get to see them in the classroom, I'm associating what they told me on Google Classroom with their actual face. And I think that will make it a little bit easier for me. That's probably been my biggest stress of starting out virtually, is getting those relationships built. I do plan on implementing an end of the week Google form asking students what they learned for the week. I did not do this at the end of the year, and I wish I would have, because I think it's a really good idea. And I included a link to a draft of my form. I call it a draft because everything I do changes all the time. And so I just want to give the students a chance to tell me what they need from me. I plan on sending my invites to parents to join Remind, of course. And then anybody that I see that isn't getting their work done, I will send them personal invites. And then lots of Screencastify videos. I did not do any Screencastify at the end of this year because my students already knew how to do everything, because everything we did was stuff we had done in the classroom. But with this Chromebook extension, you can record what is on your screen, but also you can record you can record your voice. And the only limitation with it is for the free version, you only are allowed up to 5 minutes of recording. And so I may have to do, either be really quick at my talking, or I may have to do a couple of videos to get through one thing. But I think this is going to be important because students aren't going to know how to get onto BrainPop. Students aren't going to know how to work Google Classroom. And so I plan on using Screencastify to teach them those things. Now, one interesting thing is that my district actually did not allow me to use the Inq-ITS at the end of this year. And their main reason was they wanted everybody using similar resources. They didn't want to stress out the parents with adding all these different resources. However, I have gotten permission next year, if we start virtually, that I can use this program. And I use Inq-ITS a lot of different reasons. There is nothing out there quite like this program that helps you with NGSS. It has been so hard, and I've been doing this for 6 years. It has been so hard to find a resource that give these students that just takes them to the level of NGSS. I really do feel like Inq-ITS does that. I do not spend time at the beginning of the year teaching the scientific process. I let Inq-ITS do that. So like the first one we do, like I said, we start out with ecology. The first one we do is the predation lab. And so we do that one together. It is a harder one, but I walk it through with them together, and I will purposely make mistakes as we do it to show students that when Rex pops up, he's trying to help you, because otherwise kids just want to exit out of them and not read them. And so when he pops up, we read them, and he'll throw out those vocabulary words that they need to know, like hypothesis and independent variable and dependent variable and control. And I love that about this program, because those kids don't learn by just writing definitions out. They learn by using the vocabulary. And so when those words pop up, kids are going to naturally, if they don't know what it means, is, well, what does that word even mean? And so then we talk about that. I teach them how to Google words and figure out what they mean by doing that. And I walk them through how to use the program independently. And so in the process, when Rex keeps popping up, independent variable, and hypothesis, they start to learn then that meaning of that term after using it for repeatedly throughout the program. And so Inq-ITS it helps my students learn the scientific process. They have learned, I notice that halfway through the year, my students will start carrying over the Inq-ITS to what we're doing in the classroom, whatever project or lab or hands-on activity that we're doing in the classroom. And they'll start to say things, for example, like they'll say, well, you know what, when we do this experiment, we should only change one thing, because on Inq-ITS, they only lets us change one thing. So we should do that in this, experiment. And they'll also, when they get to the claim, evidence, and reasoning, because I have them write claim, evidence, and reasoning for pretty much every hands-on activity we do. When we start about halfway through the year, I start noticing students that will say, well, the evidence, we haven't included any data in our evidence. We need to go back to our data table, because on Inq-ITS, that's what we do. We need to go back and include that. And so it has taught them how to get through an inquiry activity on their own without me having to teach them how to do it. They've learned it through this program. So I've told my district this, and so they've given me permission to do one if we start out virtually next year. And so my plan is, if we go longer than 3 weeks, because I do feel like they have to have, before they can do the predation lab, they do have to have some background knowledge. And so after 3 weeks, I'll have that background knowledge delivered through, I plan on using Edpuzzles and BrainPops and ReadWorks. And so once that background knowledge is built, if we're still virtual next year, I do plan on doing a Screencastify video of me going through the predation lab, and then they just will have to log in and follow my steps to get themselves through it, and which is similar to what I would do in the classroom. So I'm hoping that will help, because I can't imagine starting a year without using the Inq-ITS, just because of what it does teach my students. And I think they need to start out the year that way. And then I just wanted to kind of end my presentation with just some NGSS resources that I've used. So I just have links, because you guys will have access to this presentation. And so there are links to some of the CEA examples, which are classroom embedded assessments. I was involved in developing a lot of these with other teachers and with the State Department. And so these are not meant as end of the unit assessments, but they're just little things you can throw at students throughout the year, just to kind of see where they are with the content. They're not meant to be graded. They're just meant to see where they are. And even if you don't teach NGSS, they're just great resources, because they have been developed by teachers who have had a lot of training in NGSS and just have a lot of experience. And then the second link is to Kentucky's TCTs, which are through course tasks. I also helped develop a couple of these as well. And these are actually kind of the opposite of CEAs. These are meant to go, again, just kind of, they're not meant for like one specific unit. They're just meant to throw at students throughout the year. But they're supposed to give you an idea where they are within the practices and cross-cutting concepts, which is different from the actual content itself. So the use of the CEAs and the TCTs give you that three-dimensionality the NGSS calls for. And then the last link that I have on there is your NGSS evidence statements. These are a little bit different from your actual standards themselves. It has the standard on them, but what I use this document when as my main document when I design my curriculum or go back and revise it. At the bottom of the standard, it actually breaks it down into what students should actually be able to do when they're done with the standard. And so I have found it very helpful when we have been creating district common assessments. I will go back to those evidence statements and say, okay, if we give this assessment, are we hitting all of these evidence statements? If yes, then we're going to have evidence of students mastering this particular standard. And that ends my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. Now we are going to harass you with questions.
Bring them on.
Okay, I'm going to start with the first one from Kristen. Do you feel like students get overwhelmed or confused by using so many different resources or platforms? If so, how do you manage that?
At first, they definitely can, but they get used to it because in middle school they have 8 different classes, and each teacher has different resources they use, which is why my district at the end of this year wanted us only using certain resources so that parents weren't getting overwhelmed. But what I have found with teaching 6th grade, that at the beginning of the year, they do get overwhelmed with it. And so I actually, that's why I organize my Google Classroom the way I do. And then I keep a list in my classroom on my whiteboard of all of our resources that we use and how they log in, because that's the biggest thing is students, if it doesn't have a login with Google, students will be like, oh my gosh, I don't remember how to log into this website. Or even if it does have a login with Google, they forget to look for that. And so I just have it on my whiteboard. I'll say, okay, pull everywhere, log in with Google, brain pop, and then I'll put what their login should look like.
Yeah, perfect. I found the same thing in my classroom. Like if it integrated with Google Classroom, that it was really easy. And it's like, we used a number of Actively Learn, Edpuzzle, etc. And it's so much easier if it integrates with Google Classroom so that they can just remember I have one place to go. And, Clever, other things like that are similar. Bob Gilmore, you've got your hand up. So, Bob, let me see if I can, Bob, I'll get to you next. First, I have a question. Susan wants to know if you've created a Screencastify, if you've created a video yet, and if you'd share that video that students could watch that would help them. She said that would show a student how to use Inq-ITS to learn from their mistakes. And she said, and to appreciate Rex, learning that vocabulary. She said she'd even use it next week if you had that video available.
And well, I don't yet, but I mean, like I said, I plan on using it next year. So if I I don't know when you need it next week, but I wouldn't even mind getting it made, so I have it ready for next year. And I don't know if there's a way of sharing that out or not, Charity, but
yeah, I could share it. And I have similar videos, and I can share those, and you can be like, hey, I like the way Angela says it better, and my feelings will not be hurt. It's okay. I'll survive. It's okay. I'm trying to make it, Cam, I know you're there. If you can make it so that Bob Gilmore can talk. For some reason, my screen just is not allowing me to do that. I wanted to let Bob chat. Marjorie wants to know what percentage of your students participated in the online learning?
That's a good question. So I didn't figure out the percentage, but I have 155 students this year. And I, at the end of it, now, this is with me sending parents messages saying, hey, your student hasn't, your child hasn't done anything yet. I had 10 students. That's it. Only 10 students that hadn't done anything. Now, there were some of those students that may have only done a few of the assignments, but I'm in my district, in my school, I have some very, top-notch students that are, from, privileged areas, and I've got some top-notch students that are struggling with things at home that, you know, when they go home, they're taking care of their siblings. And so as long as they were doing some of the work, I was thrilled. And I only had 10 of the 155 that didn't do anything.
That's great. And they asked, did you grade students or was it pass fail?
We were not allowed to grade students.
Okay.
We were told it had to be more of a participation thing. So like if they did something with the assignment, we had to give them a 60%. If they did like less than half of it, if they did like more than half, we did percentages based on how much they got done.
Did you have, it says, did you have any accountability verifier for students to show they've watched your weekly video? Like, I love Edpuzzle for the fact that I can be like, did you watch it? Did you answer my questions? But did you have a different way that you would keep students accountable for watching the videos?
I mean, I could look at it to see that they watched it like on Edpuzzle and stuff. And that the reason why I did the weekly questions to them on Google Classroom was so that I could kind of have an idea of where they were. So I would be careful with how I worded my questions on Google Classroom and try to make it to where I could really tell if they really did pay attention or if they were just kind of put it on and then did whatever and then just guessed at a question.
The next question has to do with the price range of Inq-ITS. And I can tell you that you could send in a quote when you're, a quote request when you're in our system. You can just click on receive a quote and send in information because Ed will need to know your number of students and number of teachers because access is dependent on the number of students, number of teachers, how many labs you want, etc. He can give you a bunch of different options. But Angela can talk about how she uses the student progress level, the data, basically, student progress level of mastery that Inq-ITS gives you. Like, how do you use that data that you get from Inq-ITS?
Well, I use that data. I share it. We meet weekly. I meet weekly with the other science teacher that's in 6th grade, and then our curriculum specialist is usually in that meeting. And then we just kind of share data that we have from just different things that we do. And so I will actually share with them that data because what I like about it is the color coding. I'm a very visual person, and so I'll pull up my reports, and I'll pull up a student, and I'll be like, hey, look. One particular student I have this year, she was retained this last year. So she was one that had failed last year. And she's starting out this year with, you can see at the beginning of the year when we first did these Inq-ITS, she had it was not very good. Like she did not have a whole lot of blue in her report. And so I pulled up her report from the last one that we had done before we went virtually, and there was so much blue on her report. It was amazing. And this is a student who still, even this year, we were struggling to get her to do things. We were afraid she was going to, be in that failing zone again because she just would not do. But she felt challenged by the Inq-ITS, and so she would she was like, I can do this, and she would sit right by me, and I would not help her, and it was amazing to see her growth. But I would do that with just different students that teachers would complain about, saying, hey, well, they're not doing anything, and I'm like, well, they may not be showing you what they're doing, but they're learning. So that's what I liked about the reports.
That's awesome. We have another question from Tracy. How are you emailing individual students and parents with Google Classroom? And let me say, Tracy, that it is dependent on your district and what your district has enabled. And so Angela can say how she can do it in her district, but your district might not necessarily have the same permissions outlined for your district.
Right. I can't email them through Google Classroom. But I send them just individual messages under the stream. I use the announcement part of stream, and then you can just select just that individual student. But we use for our grading system, we use Infinite Campus, and it actually allows me on Infinite Campus to go in and I can go in and select all of my parents, and I can write one message and it'll send out that same message to all of my parents, or I can individually select parents and it'll send out emails to them and to that one, whatever email they have that they use to register their student with.
And some districts have enabled that via Google Classroom as well. It's district to district. Catherine asked, do you set up a different Google Classroom for each period? I can say I do. I have 6 periods and 203 students, and I've only been using one, but considering grouping periods by honors and non-honors or individual classes, I cannot imagine not grouping by individual classes when it comes to grading. What about you, Angela?
Same here. Because I individualize things so much on Google Classroom, like I can't imagine having to go through 155 names just to find one student. And so, and some classes are different than others. Like, I might have my 5th period class maybe further ahead and need something different. Or I might have another class that as a whole, they just, maybe this particular resource isn't working with them. Because I'm not going to keep using something just because it's a great resource. If it doesn't work for the students, you shouldn't just keep using it. So I try to find things that work for my students. So doing individual classes on Google Classroom allows you to be able to differentiate them.
Yeah. And things come up when you're in a classroom in real time, right? Like you have an assembly all of a sudden, and you're like, oh, apparently my 50-minute class is now 15. Or you have a fire drill that only impacts one class. So when you're in real time, and we might be hybrid in real time, who knows? But just having the ability to make that, to change things up for each class is really, really helpful. The next question is, I guess more to me, is Inq-ITS thinking about adding a tool to import scores to Google Classroom or another interface? We're looking at linking more heavily with Google Classroom, but I would actually discourage you from directly using the scores from Inq-ITS. So if you look at our proficiency scale, someone is considered proficient in our system, like dark blue, but their score could be 71%. And like, I would never want to, if you were using 100% score, I would never want to give a kid that I considered proficient a 71. And so I like to think of those scores a bit more like a 0 to 4 score. So I would encourage you, what I did is I had my students print their labs to a PDF and then attach them in Google Classroom. Sometimes I had my students make an additional graph with that data, whether it was by hand or Google or Excel, something along those lines. And then I would have my students write up how they would improve their scores. Like, let's say they got a really low score in hypothesizing or data collection or something. I would have them, when they were submitting it, I would give them a chance to improve their scores at that point, like do some reflection. And I feel like they do their best thinking when they're doing reflection and looking back at the rubric and going, okay, how should I improve this? And those rubrics now are available on this site. And I feel like from then I would take that information and I would score it. And I know that that's not as easy as just pulling a score across, but at the same point, like I would never want to give a kid who is considered proficient a 71. And I like kids having the chance to do some reflection. And Mike Plotz asks how you provide feedback to students on their Inq-ITS work. Angela, how did you provide feedback to kiddos?
Well, I used the ink blotter to keep track of what they were doing real time. And we have a program called Go Guardian where I can see their screens while they're in my classroom. And so I would have ink blotter up on my actual desktop computer. I would have Go Guardian up on my Chromebook and So I would be like looking at what alerts I was getting on Inkblotter, and then I would look at their individual screens, and then I would, depending on the student, some students don't like to be called out in class on stuff. And if I knew that, I could chat with them through GoGuardian, through the Chromebook. But if I knew it was a student that needed me to actually come help them like individually, I would just go to them and say, hey, look, you're stuck on this. Let me help you kind of get through this. Or look, you keep changing this variable when you don't, you just need to change one thing. And then I would walk them through, hey, look back up at the goal, look at your hypothesis. And so I would just give them feedback as they were working, going throughout. And at first, the first time that they had to do one on their own, they all wanted to come ask me questions all the time. And then they realized, they got comfortable and they realized, hey, if we're doing something wrong, she's going to come help us. Like, we don't have to go to her. She's going to know. And so they knew that that feedback was coming.
We had a question about brain pop and like this teacher having problems with individual students being able to use brain pop. I think that might be because maybe that's something that you have access to because of your paid subscription. Is that possible?
Yeah, like you have to, like, you can look at some free ones. I think they have a few free ones if you don't have an actual paid subscription. But yeah, your district has to pay for a subscription in order for you to be able to use like all the parts of BrainPop.
Angela, have you used Flipgrid at all?
Yeah, actually, yes, I have. Now, I tried to use it virtually just as a communication tool, but it just didn't work out well. The feedback wasn't quite one-on-one like what I liked and what they liked, but I use it in the classroom all the time, and I love it. It stresses my students out because they don't, I don't know, they don't like it as much. But I do a weather prediction unit activity, and they have to make their own weather forecast. And so I make them use Flipgrid to give me their forecast.
Oh, that's funny. Have you talked about GoFormative. Have you used Kami before? Can you talk about the differences, GoFormative versus Kami?
I have never used Kami.
Okay.
I think I've heard of it because it sounds familiar. But with our district paying for the GoFormative,
yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Google Jamboard is a bit like Flipgrid. Oh, interesting. I haven't used Google Jamboard. Awesome. Okay, I'm trying, if I have ignored your question, somebody, it is not on purpose. I am trying to get to absolutely every question because we have a lot of them. It's wonderful. Yeah, I really, if somebody has used Screencastify, Loom, and Google Meet to record themselves for students, I'd love your feedback. I don't think I couldn't find anything. I don't think anybody has compared the three and said, hey, this is what I use and this is why I love it. But if you have, please let us know. I'd love to hear from somebody who's compared all of them. But yeah, like, have you used Google Meet to record yourself? Or I've pretty much used Screencastify. Have you used Google Meet to record yourself?
No.
Yeah. It's just like so many different resources, and you kind of I want somebody else to experiment with all of them and get back to me. Somebody else has said, someone asked about Remind. Oh, shoot. Just for you to talk a little bit more about your process with Remind. I'm not finding that in here. Somebody asked a bit more about like how, about how you integrate, like how you got that information maybe from parents. Did your tech department help at all with that? Because I know that makes a difference with Remind. Did you have to input all the information, or did your tech department help?
Well, our tech department, it exists, but it doesn't. Uh, they spend a lot of their time helping students with their Chromebooks. And so, but no, what I do is I try first sending the link by email to my parents to get as many as I can signed up for it.
Mm-hmm.
Then of course it won't probably happen, this year, but in the past when we've had like open houses and parent teacher conferences, I would have that information up on my board when they came into my room, and that would be the first thing I would say is, hey, get out your phone,
Mm-hmm.
get onto my remind.
Yeah.
And so I would get a lot. I would say I get out of 155 students, I probably get about 70 signed up that way. And then I just go in on our grading system on Infinite Campus, and it takes some time, but I look up the students that I don't have the parents of. I will look up their cell phone numbers, and
Oh,
I will send them an invite through Remind It. Like you can actually put in the phone numbers yourself. And like I said, it does take some time, but it is so worth it because you just do it once and then you
yeah.
have it for the whole year.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
when I need to get a hold of Johnny's mom because Johnny's not doing anything or he's
Yeah.
acting school, I
Yeah.
can just pull out, my phone even and just be like, I'm sending your mom a text message. I do it right there in the classroom.
That's awesome. I have somebody asking about actually videoing a lab, like actually videotaping. And I can tell you what I would do. I would use my iPad or my cell phone and set it up to record me, and I would do an unlisted video in YouTube because I'm not comfortable with like a video that I would make for my students being readily available on YouTube, but I would do an unlisted one and then I could share that with my students in Google Classroom. How would you do it, Angela, if you were actually going to do like an example lab in your classroom or outside or whatever, and you were going to videotape yourself doing the lab? How would you do it?
I would say it would depend on where I was doing it. Like if I was doing it in my classroom, I have a really good document camera that I actually use when I do labs in my classroom. I use it to project what I'm doing up on my board, so it makes it easier for everyone to see it. So I would probably record it that way through my document camera. But if it was something I needed to be outside or I was at home, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that. I'd probably use just my Chromebook. I'd probably just use a camera on my Chromebook, or you probably could use Google Meet for that too, because
Yeah.
you can record.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Do you use a template when you email your kids individually, or are you writing 150 different emails?
It depends on what it is I'm saying.
Yeah.
I can actually, you can create an Infinite Campus, you can create templates. And so I have some that are created, but occasionally I'll have like one individual student that I need to make it more personal. And so I'll change it around for that student. But if I'm just trying to say something generic that is like, hey, you're missing blah, blah, blah assignment, and there's like 20 people missing that same assignment, I'll just type in that one email and then just make sure it goes out to those 20 different students.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. We may have finally come to the end. I don't think that I lost any. I think we've answered everything. I really, really, really hope so, because I don't want to ignore anyone. Okay, I'm gonna give people a couple more seconds. It's so nice to see the names of these people that like I haven't talked to in so long, but I'm like, oh, I just want to reach out and say hi and hug you. But yeah, virtual hugs right now. Okay, everyone is saying thank you so much. Angela, I cannot even tell you like, I don't think you can see everyone's messages throughout this, but everyone has been saying thank you so much for your information and the resources. And I will save this and send out the link to the recording and send out the link to the presentation. We really appreciate your time and hope that you can share your information with more teachers, because we all just really need and appreciate this information right now. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope it helps.
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you so much. Have a great day and a great weekend.
All right, you too.
Thank you. Bye.